G'day everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar to discuss opportunities and shared lessons for accessing export markets for strawberries. This discussion is very timely as the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture just issued this week an industry advice notice advising the control measures for the export of fresh strawberries from Australia. This is following the incidents of the intentional tampering late last year. We'll cease as of next Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2019. So bring us into this discussion today. My name is Clinton Muller. I work with RM Consulting Group. We coordinate the National Strawberry Research and Development Extension Program, Strawberry Innovation. This is funded by the Strawberry Levy Fund with co-contribution from the Australian Government through Hort Innovation. We're very fortunate today to be joined by a very experienced and knowledgeable team of speakers who are going to be discussing the results of targeted research from addressing market protocols, getting product to market, and identifying what consumers actually want in international markets. As part of the panel discussion today, we're joined by Kate Fielder from CSIRO, who will be discussing a systems approach for Queensland fruit fly management and export market protocols. We've also got another Clinton McGrath from the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries to discuss market access and logistics for getting fruit to international markets. On the phone all the way from Vietnam, we're joined by Robin Roberts from Griffith University in Queensland, who will be discussing the outcomes from a consumer study that was undertaken in Indonesia. And last but definitely not least, we've got leading Australian strawberry exporter Jamie Michaels from TI Produce Marketing in Western Australia to share some of his perceptions and experiences. A bit of housekeeping for everyone before we get underway. For those who have not joined a webinar before, this is a 1-hour discussion that will be recorded and will be made available on the Strawberry Innovation website, so you can watch again or share with others who were unable to join the session live. For those who are joining us live, I would encourage you to participate and fire away with any questions you have at all. I'll be taking a couple of burning questions for each speaker as they finish up, but we've enabled enough time in the agenda to make sure we can have a good discussion and round a Q&A at the end. How to actually ask the question, you would have noticed there was a GoToWebinar toolbar pop-up when you logged into the screen. So if you just click on the question bar there, you can type a question. While you're in that toolbar, you'll also find a couple of handouts in there. We've got one on developing Asian markets for strawberries, as well as another fact sheet based on a queued up project around the export supply chain for Queensland strawberries to Hong Kong. So given we've got a tight agenda today, I might throw straight into it and pass the ranks over to Kate, who will run us through the CSIRO project and other partners in relation to a systems approach. So welcome, Kate.
Hi, thank you. All right, let me do this. Okay, so this is actually quite timely because in the last month, the systems approach field trials that are happening in Victoria have recently included strawberries onto our portfolio. So we are about 4 years into some of the other field crops trying this methodology, but strawberries will be part of the process very soon. So today I'm just going to briefly talk about what's happening in our systems approach program. We are funded by Hort Innovation and specifically the Asian Markets Fund. So within this project lifetime, we're only looking at interstate trade that's multilaterally approved. But the long-term goal is to set growers up for international trade while not using an endpoint treatment. So this is actually a pretty extensive project. We have an apple case study in WA. We have cherries being trialed in New South Wales and Victoria. New South Wales also has a citrus protocol, and then we've just taken on berries, which is strawberries and rubus, in Victoria as well. From the CSIRO perspective, we're responsible for modeling both qualitative and quantitative, which will end up being used to develop tools for industry to be able to write their own protocols for biosecurity pests. And then we're also doing a lot of engagement with the industry in order to have economic analyses done and put together an implementation plan for industry. So I will take a step back for a second because just quickly explain what systems approaches are. It's looking at at multiple measures throughout the production system to control a biosecurity pest with the intention of not doing an endpoint treatment like fumigation or cold storage. And right now, a lot of these crops already are doing enough in their IPM systems. We are now just putting data and science behind these measures to really show that these are viable protocols to control pests. Within our project, we are trying to put together data to support these ICAs for domestic trade. Right now, the goal is with citrus, cherry, and apple. And since we're starting later with berries, it will take a little bit more time past our project endpoint. The biggest output that we're looking at, though, is putting together generic tools to help industries make educated decisions about bringing on protocols. So how to build systems approach protocols, the economic feasibility of it, and also how to implement it and what kind of materials are needed. And hopefully this will help with domestic and international market access, as well as reduce disinfestation costs and chemical usage. So like I said, the end goal is really international trade. And so I put together this directory of internationally active systems approach protocols. So we have about 60, it's up to 65 at this point. So you can really see that this is a thing. It's not just a scientific theory. And so Australia is quite behind, and Department of Ag has voiced their interest in starting to trade with systems approaches in order to reduce the methyl bromide usage. So it's a really great time for us to pursue this in multiple systems. The heart of our project is really making these protocols based on risk and how we can reduce risk throughout the process. And so we've developed this framework, and I've filled it in just for the cherry protocol we're working on. So you can see how we're using multiple factors to reduce risk at each stage of production. So the four main factors to reduce risk are minimizing exposure to pests, minimizing host vulnerability, reducing the infestation rate once the fruit is infested, and reducing establishment once the product is shipped. And so we're able to retroactively judge other protocols, but then also use this as a way to build new protocols. And the one thing we are really emphasizing is the use at the international level. So everything we're doing is based on published results and published data. So it's very solid evidence to show which measures really do reduce risk. And when I say modeling, I know a lot of people get a little nervous, but a lot of our modeling is bringing big sets of data into something that's really tangible and usable for industry. So we've modeled the entire production system, and this is just a snapshot, but you can actually see that you can choose different activities, like, are you going to do a very thorough pesticide spray? Will you use netting? Do you practice good agricultural practices? And we see how each of these steps will add value to your protocol, and if you will have a high risk of infestation or low risk. So this is just one way an industry can judge to see if it's possible, first of all, to manage a pest using systems approaches. Some of the other tools we're working on are things like this. We have a heat map that we've made for all of the growing regions. And this is just one area, but you can see if we want to use a measure like very cold winters that control fruit fly populations, this heat map will identify locations where that's a viable measure for control. And another tool we've put together is looking at the individual trapping results. So the increasing lines are different stages of fruit fly, and we see that when we trap these adults, what we're seeing is that they're carrying over from the previous season. And so this identifies that good agricultural practices in the off season aren't happening. And in reality, the winter isn't effective enough at controlling those rogue populations. So we're trying to create a lot of tools that will help us better understand the fruit fly populations and what measures are needed to control them. And the real heart of the project is based around this. We're putting values to each step of production to see how everything reduces risk in the resulting fruit while packing. But it's a lot of work. We're only 1 year into the project, and there's a lot of analysis that needs to happen there. But in the end, we're looking to have a scientific data package that will support an ICA trade protocol. Right now, there's one ICA just for a very limited region of Queensland, and we are looking to make it more industry-wide. And so we're proposing one that applies to as many states as possible. So we're in communication with industry in WA, Victoria, and Queensland in order to create a pest management protocol that really applies to more growers, because right now the current ICA is quite limited. Like I said, we're doing some economic feasibility, and we are making really basic tools so industry can kind of plug in their values and see what pest management method would be best. But then we're looking at some more intangible values, like what is the value of eliminating an endpoint treatment, or what's the value of streamlining your logistics more. So systems approach has a lot of values, but sometimes it's hard to put a monetary value on it. And within the project, I'm the horticultural industry engagement officer. So I'm responsible for all the engagement. So I've been doing a lot of feedback interviews and feasibility surveys. So I do a lot of the kind of stuff that's, I guess, soft science. But in the end, we really want this project to be embraced and used as soon as it's done. The goal is to not develop a data package and implementation plan that will sit on the shelf. And so I regularly engage with Berries Australia, with CGA, with Citrus Australia, all of our industry bodies that we work with in order to make sure we're on the right track at each step of the process. And so I'm always looking for input. How does the protocol work? Do farmers like it? Is it feasible? We need to make sure we're on the right track. So right now we're still in data collection phase. We'll be doing some sampling in Queensland, hopefully this year, in order to get more high-risk infestation data. And there's still a lot of modeling to be done. But the big thing now is that we are building the strawberry protocol as we speak and engaging with industry to see, common production practices and seeing what the needs really are. So it'll be great to hear from the other speakers and maybe from growers who are listening, so we can get some input as to what is needed from a domestic trade standpoint as well as international trade. And that's my contact information if anyone does want to get in touch with me or has any questions about participating in the systems approach study.
Fantastic. Look, really appreciate that, Kate. And if anyone's got any questions for Kate, feel free to drop them into the question bar. Just as well, people are thinking of questions, Kate, I have one. What are some of the expectations potentially for strawberry growers around that protocol? So what's involved, nuts and bolts on farm in terms of monitoring? Who's able to undertake that monitoring? What some of the likely costs are to be incurred with that?
So I know money is always the deciding factor, and there's no cost to the growers. This is fully funded and supported by the state and state government and CSIRO and Hort Innovation. So currently, there's kind of a similar backbone to all of these systems approach protocols. So they involve an initial audit just to make sure that you have a fairly intact and in good shape farm. And there's a lot of measuring that is done to map out the facility so we can put in a fruit fly grid. And so we have a set of traps that will be installed and monitored by a third party. So either a state employee or a trained consultant. And that trapping happens every other week during the harvest, well, pre-harvest and harvest period. If it hits a threshold of 2 or more flies over a 2-week period, there's a bait spray that's applied. And then there's an inspection at the end of season during harvest. So that's it. It's really, it's straightforward, but it really embraces the IPM practices that are kind of already happening on farm. And right now it is just growers in Victoria. And most of those growers were already involved in a PFA. So they're already in the habit of managing or good practices and have an awareness of Queensland fruit fly.
Excellent. Look, thanks very much for that, Kate. If there are any questions come through for Kate, feel free to drop them down at any time and we can put them again to Kate at the end of the session. We're going to say farewell to Kate for a moment and say good day to Clinton McGraw with the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. And I'm just giving screen sharing rights to Clinton. Welcome today, Clinton.
Thanks, Clinton. You're must be a good bloke with a name like that, mate.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks for inviting us to participate in this webinar. Very interesting from Kate, and some of my information will relate to that, I believe. But so I'm going to talk about the last couple of years. Me and fellow colleague Bron Ford have been working in some strawberry export development projects, primarily in Hong Kong and Indonesia, and hopefully I explain why we did that as I go along. So the first question we were always asked is why export? And most people on the line who are with the strawberry industry, pretty much the biggest loss of, I guess, income or price received in Australia is due to oversupply. So a quick graph there shows generally in Australia, strawberry prices are high when supply is low, and that's probably just not the strawberry industry, very widespread. Exporting isn't for everyone, but there is definitely people want to export, and that can only be good for the industry moving forward if we can take some produce off the domestic market and export. It's good for everyone in the industry, and it also will allow the industry to expand. So that's why we got into it. Where we focus, in the ring there, that's a little part of a continent called Southeast Asia. Generally, most of those countries there are about a 9-hour flight from Australia. Australia has a population of 25 billion. In that ring, there's 640 million people. So if we go and expand the industry, it's a pretty good place. It's also quite close to Australia in the scheme of things. When we export from Australia, surprise, surprise, we do it by plane or boat. We can't exactly drive a truck or a rail to our fellow neighbours like they can in Europe and Asia and the Americas. So with strawberries, there's been a recent, when I say recent, the last couple of years is a trend that's also very favourable to exporting, and that's around our competitiveness due to the Australian dollar dropping. I work in a lot of commodities in the export space, and that is one of the big drivers of their success in recent times. But in saying that, to take advantage of it, we've got to be ready and capable. Unfortunately, in regard to strawberries in Queensland, we've got the best rugby league team in the world. We've also got this little fly that Kate talked about. Unfortunately, the rest of the world and rest of Australia doesn't like it. And also with strawberries, they're also very perishable. So that is the reasons we've done what we, I guess, have started in the export journey. The two countries that we primarily focused on in our research are Hong Kong and the other one's Indonesia. Now, the reason why we do that, hopefully I explained, but that whole South Asia, a lot of opportunities. Hong Kong itself, a island / a bit of China mainland, pretty big population, like bigger than most of our major cities, high GDP, so a high income there. Don't grow anything themselves, so they're not a competitor as such. From Brisbane, near the 1 hour drive from the major Queensland strawberry producing region, there's, I think, 6 daily flights into Hong Kong, which is 8 hours away. So in theory, and it does happen, we can pick our strawberries in Queensland and they're in Hong Kong on the supermarket the next day. Another good thing about Hong Kong, when we look at the laws about what's required and market access, pretty much it's all go, all green. You don't need an import permit, you don't need a phytosanitary certificate, you don't need any other additional decorations. It's what's called a non-protocol market. This has other limitations, it's very competitive. So fruit fly to the people in Hong Kong isn't a concern. What also good about Hong Kong is they like strawberries. So if you look here, in 2018, they imported $64 million of strawberries, which was US dollars. And when you look at what they paid about $8.66 per kilo US dollars. So that's about, $2.50, $2.60 a punnet in current Australian dollars. So potentially a lucrative market if we can get it right. Australia does currently export there, but we only have 2.5% share of that import market. So what we did is, I guess we demonstrated to industry the supply chain to get it there. There's a lot of fear about exporting. Some of it's justified based on it goes to the other side of the world, will you get paid, how they treat the product, etc., etc. So I guess our project was about demonstrating two things: the Queensland strawberry itself, and also to the industry, the actual supply chain there, to try and get some confidence. So we did what they call a common activity called walking the chain. So we harvested strawberries at Caboolture. We took them to a freight forwarder who loaded them onto a plane. We tracked the temperature as that journey continued. They went on a plane, they went off a plane. They arrived at 3 different supply chains into Hong Kong. And I'll let the quality of the strawberries when we get there tell the story. So one thing about exporting is you need good partners, and logistics and the supply chain is very, very important. So if you get people who are also committed to making it happen, it's good. So these were a few different varieties from Queensland, which turned up in Hong Kong in immaculate condition. Those ones there in the picture currently there, they were 4 days after packing in Queensland. The next ones, that was 7 days. So they still were in a cold room in Hong Kong 7 days after harvest, and quality was good. So we sat down with the some of the importers to let them examine Queensland strawberries and see what they thought. Generally, it's good. It's going to be a potential opportunity, I think, in the future for growing strawberries in Queensland and exporting out of Australia as a whole. Here's some of the competitors' products. So these are American strawberries. When you look at if we went back to the import, Japan was the biggest importer by dollar-wise into Hong Kong. theirs were about over $20 a kilo Australian dollars. They were imported into Hong Kong, so they're a specialty market. The biggest by volume is the US, and that's in their season, which Korea seems to fill the gap when they're off season in the US. So there's potential for Australia to fit in and compete with those markets. This is the picture. So we got Queensland Red Rhapsody strawberries, very dark. So here's them compared to the imported product from the US. So there's a dead set, I guess, visual appearance difference. So we've got to convince the consumer, and which Robin Roberts may talk about next, that our strawberries are good to eat and worth buying. The next, we did some work around Indonesia. Now, people would ask, why would you look at Indonesia? Well, Indonesia, I guess it's our closest neighbour. There's some phenomenal population there. The island of Java, where the capital city Jakarta is there's like 180 million people. It's a very large market, potentially, in the fact that they got the rising middle class, I suppose, which is what they tell us is going to be the future for food exports in Asia. Very busy people. But what made us interested in our project that helped us with this one is that at the time, Indonesia would allow irradiated strawberries. So we did the project to look at whether the Indonesian consumer and supply chain would accept irradiation as a protocol to let us get our fruit there with the fruit fly issue. Unfortunately now, at the time, they did allow that protocol. For some reason that I don't believe is science-based, it's not at the moment. Indonesia, on the scheme of things for the site, does not import many strawberries at all. So there's two ways to see that. It's either a big opportunity because they don't eat them, or it's not an opportunity because they don't eat them. And I think it'll be the other one, that is, they just don't, strawberries isn't in their diet. But the berry market around the world's growing, potentially Indonesia can too. Another challenge for Indonesia for us from Brisbane is there was no direct flight to Jakarta out of Brisbane or anywhere else in Queensland, so we had to do a transshipment. So they flew them into Singapore, then they got loaded onto another plane. So that was something else we're demonstrating as part of the project. Another thing about Indonesia is it's also what they call a protocol market. So what Kate talked about before, because of fruit fly, certain areas in Australia can send to Indonesia direct without a treatment. However, where we come from, you have to treat them. You also have to get an import permit, which is, there's a limited number of importers that will be allowed to bring strawberries in. You'll have to get that first before you go. You need a phytosanitary certificate to say that there's no insects or soil or disease, and you also need the additional declaration, which depends on where you are in Australia and what's required. And these are things you need to investigate before you do it. Ours from Queensland is we have to treat them with methyl bromide, which the process is that they have to heat the strawberries up to the mid-20s for a period and then treat them with methyl bromide gas. And that has to be done before they leave Australia. So this was the challenges for us, is to make sure, think about it, strawberries is not a good thing to heat them up for a start, then cool them back down, then freight them via air to one country where they get offloaded onto another plane and then back to another one. The good thing is, through the partners that we work for, it all worked good. So Queensland grower holding the strawberries in a supermarket in Jakarta, and that was 9 days after harvest, and they'd been gassed in the meantime and the quality stepped up. Now, that was all contributed to the existing supply chains which we demonstrated, and they're actually quite good. The biggest things we learnt is that immediately after they get methyl bromide, to force air cool them back down to 2 degrees, and then use special stuff like foil in the air containers when they go over there. What we learn about Jakarta, and I'll admit, we did lose some loads because they did get hot, is that they have to arrive at the Jakarta airport before 9 o'clock at night. Otherwise, they will not get put in a cold room. So you have to make sure that your planes link up, and your partners will be aware that has to happen. The next biggest learning is that the airway bill, which goes with all produce that leaves Australia on an airplane, you've got to have that it's a perishable product, stored between 0 to 4. That's like instructions. If that's not on there, when it does get to Singapore, they'll just leave it out on the tarmac to the next plane. Whereas it says 0 to 4, they put it away and wait till the one. So where to next with our work? We're going to continue on because we really want to turn exports into dollars for Australian producers. However, there's a few challenges that we've identified, and the first one's around MRLs. Australia's clean and green, got a clean and green image. Unfortunately, some countries now in Asia, and Southeast Asia in particular, have MRLs that are lower than ours. They've also got 0 levels for products that we currently use. So we'll have to keep a good eye on that. We don't want an MRL breach in one of these countries in Australia as being told that we're not as clean and green as we think. The next thing is about collaborative models for exporting. Generally, the importers and the retail markets in these countries want strawberries like they do in Australia, 365 days of the year in a consistent brand. So I guess our project's working. That'll be the next steps to make it happen. Other than that, I hope I demonstrated that it's possible, very easy to get product overseas now. There is a big opportunity. However, there's a few steps you need to take to make sure that happens. And that's it for me. Thanks, Clinton.
Excellent, Clinton. Really appreciate that. If anyone had any questions for Clinton, feel free to fire them away. But Clinton, just briefly, while you guys walked the chain for this project, probably what was the main efficiency gain you could see along the process that you could recommend?
Working with your suppliers, as strawberries are very perishable, working with, I guess, the supply chain partners so that it's a cohesive process, that it doesn't have to wait in cold rooms at airports and other places for hours, or wait for hours rather than days, and so it's all flows on. In saying that, some of the competitors' products from around the world is very good quality. We're equal, if not better, in some areas. We do have a good name as a country-wise, but committing to the export market with some importers is a barrier that they've tried Australia before, and as you know, Australia has a very diverse climate. We also have very diverse weather patterns. Generally, they don't want to hear that you had rain on the weekend and I haven't got your produce today. They want, they want it regardless. So you need, I guess, have models or collaborative models to make sure that they get what they want when they want.
Excellent. Look, thanks for that, Clinton. Really appreciate those experiences being shared. If anyone has questions at all, feel free to jot them down, but we might welcome Robin Roberts from Vietnam at the present to join us. How are you going, Robin?
Good. Thanks very much, Clinton. Look, today I'd just like to share with you the consumer study that was a part of Clinton McGrath's QDAF study that was undertaken. It certainly was the first time they'd had any research to understand consumer purchasing of strawberries or the broader fruit category. So we took a two-phase approach. It was a short period of time, but the first part was qualitative in nature. We looked at focus groups to get a general sense, and then a large quantitative survey. So we looked at trying to understand motivations to purchase, the relationship or attitude between Australian and domestic and imported strawberries, and fundamental preferences for the product attributes that people were searching for, and then try and really determine what were these key purchasing points if the industry was going to design some marketing stimuli. So looking firstly at fruit perceptions and consumption, we took a broader brush approach in the beginning to try and really understand what was the consumer's relationship with fruit. So the key themes that came out were they need the fruit that's easy to eat. And this whole area was quite interesting, as probably is on the slide from Clinton there. Easy to peel or eat the skin, better to eat as is or seedless, only a few seeds. And what overwhelmingly came across compared to Australia was that out-of-home consumption was much, much higher than in-home consumption. So they weren't buying to take home for the family and consume at home. They were buying to eat at their desk at work or to take and meet a friend and consume in that way. So that's a different way to purchasing, and therefore a different implication on the packaging, on the offer that the retailer was making. Easy to buy, so that it was available. Inconsistency of supply was something that annoyed consumers. They could buy it one week but not buy it the next week. There was an overarching focus on the quality aspect, high in vitamins, food that had antioxidants, and their feeling was that fruit that was high in depth of colour related to it being high in health properties. And of course, premium prestigious, so usually expensive, only found in the premium stores in the South Jakarta area. And this was really about the package itself. When we looked at berries on the shelf, literally every strawberry was in the same type of packaging. So part of the study, and the bigger study you can see online on strawberry innovation, but was really also to trial some alternative packaging. Now, what was interesting was actually berry purchasing itself and the purchase importance of berries in someone's selection of fruit when they were considering consumption. So strawberries and blueberries are purchased for special occasions, and this is the place they held for them. The everyday fruit was apples, oranges, but berries, strawberries, blueberries really were a special occasion. However, due to the price, respondents noticed that most strawberries are probably more frequently purchased than other berries. Cranberries were the least purchased berry and not really known to consumers over there. And of course, some stated that they chose to do things with their strawberries, such as freeze them and keep them for later consumption in yogurts and things, or blend them up and make them into drinks. So, but overwhelmingly again, this health property came out that strawberries had a curative effect. And although we haven't seen any studies, they certainly link them to good health and to terminal illnesses that may, add some benefit by consuming them. So it was quite interesting in that area. But the next area, which was strawberry knowledge and influences, was really, really interesting. And this spoke directly to the experience that Jakarta consumers, both expats and locals, had with strawberries. And if Clinton's got it on the screen, there was an interesting commentary about sour, which we had to probe and uncover a bit further. They overwhelmingly had experience with sour, tart strawberries. So therefore, if the strawberry is not a little bit sour, then it mustn't be a good strawberry. And it was such a shock to us to hear this information. And when they actually tried the Australian strawberries, they enjoyed them, but the sweetness was something that was really quite unfamiliar with them. So that's an area that we really probably need to understand more, is their prior experience with the fruit to set the benchmark for what is the desired taste experience in that market. And certainly one thing that was interesting was I tried to probe the 2 points that really consumers experience. One is, the first touch point is what they see when they buy, the colour, the shape, the size. But then the next point is the taste experience. So those two overwhelmingly are the areas that we tried to capture information about. So the next was freshness. Their first impression when people think about strawberries was basically strawberries represent an active and fresh looking individual. If it's a little bit tired, if it's a little bit dull, If it's not in a clean packet, that's clean inside and outside, then they're really not comfortable with it. They were addictive though, that they felt they could not just stop at one, they needed to eat multiple. So the comments were addictive sensation that follows on when you've eaten a strawberry, that engagement. They did see it as a luxury item and belonging to a premium fruit group. And of course, the heart shape of the strawberry is very iconic and children know it well in the market. Now, as far as specific strawberry attributes or qualities that they were seeking when they were purchasing, so that first point of purchase, the shape should be nice, heart-shaped, no dark spots, no irregularities with the colours or spots. Solid, when you squeeze the fruit, it should be firm and not mushy. It definitely should be red and not pink. So the red indicates to them that it's already ripe. The pink and the white shoulders indicates to them it's not yet ripe. The white dots, which in this case was the seeds they were speaking about, should be quite white. And it should definitely be shiny and not pale. So interesting qualities that they reported back. And as far as the purchasing journey goes, the journey was really about trying to understand along the way, how often do they purge, where do they purchase, why that particular store they're purchasing, the amount they purchase, and of course, how much are they prepared to pay for it, how often, as in the regularity, and of course, are they with someone? Are they consulting someone on their purchase? Do you think this is a good strawberry? Do you not? So the journey itself is quite interesting, and as I said, I encourage you to read the full report if you'd like some further insights, or send me an email and I'm happy to have a chat. So that's basically just the insights from a very small study, but it was a pleasure to work on that project. Thank you, Clinton.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Robin. Robin, I'm just curious about this study. What I guess your number one takeaway message from it was?
I guess probably that every strawberry market is different in terms of areas, and in Jakarta, the takeaway message to me is the intended use. If you know that what your consumer is going to do with your product, then you can easily address it to be able to appeal to them. So the intended use. We know we make great strawberries, but the use, whether it's out of home, in-home consumption, that's so important.
Excellent. Look, really appreciate that, Robin, and a really interesting study that is available online on the Strawberry Innovation website, as you mentioned. Look, well, it's been a good discussion so far. Look across what's the protocols required in field, what is the aspects of the supply chain logistics to get there, and what the consumer ultimately is chasing in an Australian strawberry. So that's one part of the story, but another part of the story is actually having been there and done that. So really warm welcome to Jamie Michaels from TI Produce in Western Australia for joining us. Jamie, you're on the line with us?
I am. I've taken myself off mute. I've found the quietest spot I can be.
Fantastic. It is quiet. I think I had Jamie's packing shed noise in the background earlier. But Jamie,
you had an airport.
Oh, airport indeed. So Jamie, what prompted you to get involved in accessing export markets?
Well, we started as an export company, so we didn't start as a grower, although I come from a horticultural family. So, we originally started exporting apples, stone fruit, melons, veggies, that sort of stuff. Then we moved into wholesaling and growing as a bit of a natural progression, which is mainly due to difficulty in getting consistent supply, particularly with the volatility of the market in Australia, where you have a weather event and the price goes through the roof. Yet we had a lot of customers overseas that required monthly pricing set in advance and that sort of thing. So we found that we were at a huge amount of exposure just relying on using third-party suppliers. So that's sort of how we got into there. Why we are continuing to export is, we really see value in export as as a relief valve and as a means of growing the market. You know, as mentioned before, there's only 25 million people in Australia. There's a lot more across the road, so it's always good to have those options. And you know, particularly over here in WA, where we never know when the next quarantine barrier is going to pop up at the border. You know, we do need to have options, you know, to ensure that we have a sustainable industry moving forward.
Jamie, how did you go about it? Like, what was the first step that you took to get involved with exporting the straws?
Well, the first steps, we're a little bit lucky that they were somewhat handed to us. My partner's father ran the International Pink Lady program for many years ago. So I guess we always had a bit of an export pedigree. And so we started off doing a lot of Pink Lady, but then we had customers who had a growing interest in strawberries, and you know, there was a small strawberry industry in WA at that point. So we started with small shipments, very small lots, finding the right partners, finding the right markets, getting the processes right. You know, walking through the process has been mentioned before, till we could get a good outturn at the other end, and then I guess it all just sort of started to grow from there.
Yeah, great. And in the process, Jamie, what are some of the biggest challenges, or dare I say it, frustrations involved?
Well, this question's got the most notes from me, that's for sure. Probably my biggest frustration right now is market access, and on a number of fronts. Number one is the speed at which Australia is able to negotiate market access with other countries. You know, the Hong Kong market was mentioned previously as a potential growth opportunity. I mean, the Hong Kong market is fairly well saturated at the moment, and there is a significant amount of Australian product that goes there. If the price is right, you know, I think if we really want to be growing our export opportunities, we need to be opening more doors. Vietnam's closed at the moment. Indonesia is difficult for many reasons, and you know, they're changing their goalposts. The Philippines is closed. China is closed. Taiwan's closed. Korea, Japan are all closed markets to us. So we really need to be, and a lot of those are markets that do have wealth. So we really do need to be moving faster in that space on, you know, convincing the government to give us some priority on market access. Another frustration on market access is, you know, the speed at which things change. You know, we had the needle incident last year, and within 24 hours, they'd brought in mandatory metal detection on a trade-by-trade basis for all exports. So anyone that wasn't prepared for that basically had to stop exports for a few days until they could buy equipment, get it calibrated, get everything done, which meant that their customers were let down, which is not good for our reputation. But on the same hand, you know, we've had an experience several years ago in one of the Middle Eastern markets where we had a change of guard in quarantine in Australia, and they decided to interpret the rules a little bit differently to how they were interpreted previously, and they stopped all shipments for the 2 weeks during Ramadan, which we actually lost a lot of ground because customers ended up going and buying stock out of Holland, and by the time we had it all sorted out, we'd lost that market for the rest of the year. So I guess that's one of the biggest frustrations. Then the other one on market access is what other countries do. You know, we know Indonesia accepted irradiation, now they don't. Thailand brought in fumigation a little while ago as a trade barrier, in inverted commas, when they were a free market previously, and it coincidentally coincided with the timing of Australian imports going to a zero tariff under the new free trade agreement that we'd negotiated. And then when we'd figured out that we could successfully fumigate and send there, they then changed their MRL so that we also can't use any of the main insecticides that we rely on, particularly for things like fruit fly control, which is the thing that they're trying to keep out in the first place. So you get all of these little things that you really need to be up to date with, and you really need to be following quite closely to make sure you don't get caught with stock sitting at the airport and the wrong paperwork. A couple of other challenges, I guess. It's harder to chase money from people overseas, so you really need to know who you're dealing with. You need to know that they're good, because laws are a little bit different over there, and it's a long way to go to try and find somebody that owes you money. There's a big challenge in competition from other countries. In Australia, we're lucky that we're isolated. We really only compete with, within the country. In your international markets, we're competing with US, Korea, Egypt, not so much Japan, because their product is just ridiculously good and commands a ridiculous price. You have to be a lot more wary of what's going on around the world. And on top of that, there's some challenges with exporters, even out of Australia, that sort of use international markets as a bit of a dumping ground. So you might be running a decent program, and then all of a sudden there's fruit dumped on a market that can't really handle it. And all of a sudden your orders stop because some of the smaller markets just don't have the capacity to absorb without taking a significant price hit. A couple of other things, there's obviously a lot of onerous sort of audits for your quarantine certifications and all of that sort of stuff. And you need to be really aware of MRLs, because they can be very different in a lot of different countries. And depending on, if you're trying to target your product for a whole spread of countries, you do find yourself quite limited in the chemistry that you then have available. One of the bigger challenges there is where you have something that is not a 0 MRL, but a slightly lower MRL. So you don't know whether, okay, if I leave it an extra day, am I going to meet the MRL? Or am I still going to be over? How does this work? So you end up having to do some testing and bits and pieces to just try and make sure that you're conforming. So look, those are all the challenges. Probably the last one, I would say, I'll just touch on, I wrote it at the last minute, which is pricing. Clinton mentioned that Hong Kong market, for example, they average about $8. But there's a few little unknowns in that. The price is lower during the Queensland and WA season. And that's just because supply and demand. But you also have a lot of customers that have substantial rebates, anything up to 12-15%. So, the price may look good, but then, once you take out their rebates and everything, it's not quite as attractive. Exchange rate's the other thing. It's really favourable for us at the moment. But 6-7 years ago, when we were at parity with the US dollar or above, it was really, really hard going just to maintain our foot in the door, to keep that open, because we knew that we would need it in the future. But, you've sort of found yourself shipping out up there with when you really could have done a lot better on the local market under that exchange rate. So there's all the doom and gloom. I didn't mean for that to sound negative, but it's just I guess the question was challenges, and there they are.
Yeah. Look, I think it sounds, Jamie, there's a lot of established lessons there from your experiences. I guess, the last question I've got for you is, knowing what you know now and all those lessons you've had along the way, what would you do differently if you were starting out again?
What would we do differently? There wouldn't be a whole lot we would do differently, to be honest. A couple of things as I mentioned before, I would have pushed for better market access a lot earlier. I mean, there's been a push in the last couple of years for that, but I mean, really, we should have started pushing 10 or 15 years ago. Had we done that, we probably would have had a lot more doors open to us at the moment, and we might even have been achieving that, 8% export that HIA has targeted. We may have even got there already. So, had we known how long this all takes, we would have started jumping up and down a lot earlier. Probably would have pushed a bit harder on various breeding programs where we could, just to have a bit more of an export focus. There is now, So in the next few years, we're probably going to see some good results on varieties that are more suited to export. But, you know, the export market demands a different sort of berry to what is currently coming through the pipeline. And we can say, yes, let's just re-educate the whole world of, you know.
Excellent. Look, appreciate that, Jamie. There's some great thoughts and reflections there from your experience. Opening the floor up to anyone, people who are participating or panelists themselves, if there was any questions of each other before we draw it to a close. I will take silence of everything has been answered succinctly and has met everyone's expectations. So thank you everyone for your time. It was greatly appreciated and welcome. And we might just draw that one call to a close and give ourselves a little bit of an early mark. So really just want to pass on my appreciation and thanks to our speakers, Kate, Clinton, Robin, and of course Jamie, and to everyone who did join us for this discussion. We hope you found it informative, and please remember that a recording of this webinar will be made available on the Strawberry Innovation Project website within about the next 24 hours. And thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope the rest of your days go well. Cheers.